Thank you. Thank you so much for your reaction.
Clive, thank you. What an amazing, amazing film and an amazing, amazing life. And more to come. Oh my gosh. Listen, if there's a moment that encapsulates what it means to feel proud of being a part of Harvard Law School and the kind of people that come out of here and the kind of lives that people lead, that this film in your life, it just captures it so beautifully. So well, thank you very much. We're very, very proud. Very proud. So this is the first time, certainly the first time I have, and I'm predicting the first time a dean of Harvard Law School has interviewed a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So could you just start, this is such a remarkable film, could you just start by saying a few words about how this project came about?
Okay, well, I first wrote my autobiography, and typically books about music do not sell. And I really had the good fortune that ABC, the network, just believed in it. Ben Sherwood, the head of the network. And so I did television appearances as though I was one of our major artists, and I did every show from Jimmy Fallon to 3 mornings on Good Morning America, an hour with Katie Couric and Letterman, etc. And the book took off. So it entered the New York Times bestseller nonfiction list at #2, and it stayed in the top 10 for 3 months. And offers started coming in for a biopic, you know, and I knew all this archival footage that I had. I mean, nobody has had access to these Grammy parties, which are now over 40 years. And I myself was shocked at the footage, you know, when I had seen it before, of me at Monterey, or me reading the lyrics of Blinded by the Light.
I did like the sweater. I thought the sweater was good.
So I just felt that a documentary film really was more appropriate. And I interviewed several directors when word got out, but the Ridley Scott firm, and they had chosen Chris Burkell, who had a feel for music, who did 20 Steps from Stardom with Morgan Neville, and that's how it began.
Well, it turned out fantastically, and let me just ask you a question that segues back to law.
Sure.
So Miles Davis once said that you think like an artist. And what I'd like to know is, and I think what the crowd would like to know is, how does that relate to thinking like a lawyer? Does it relate to thinking like a lawyer?
You know, thinking like an artist and thinking like a lawyer are disparate statements. First, I do want to make one point clear, and that is that other than being interviewed for this film, I had no connection whatsoever with who was interviewed. I was never present. I never made one call to an artist to be in it. And really, this is a film that was done by Chris Burkell and the Ridley Scott firm. So a lot of this was very touching, and the most touching, I think, you know, each of us, we go through lives, you know, and you know what affects you, but to really see artists like Simon, Garfunkel, Patti, Carlos, Bruce, the others, go back 45 years, you know, and on their own, because as I said, I was not present. I really have not, to this day, seen their interviews. I only see what made it to the final cut. But it's very touching to realize that on their own initiative, that they, you know, reaffirm the impact that we each had on the other. It's very, very touching. Look, to think like an artist and not to retreat to between modesty, immodesty, humble, or what have you. I really found that I had this natural gift. And it was only the track record. It was only after I signed Joplin and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago, Aerosmith, Earth, Wind, and Fire, that it gave me the confidence, because I don't read music. And it had to come from somewhere, because I was seeing 10, 20, 30, 40 different artists, and I was choosing these artists with the accuracy that history has shown. And when I started Arista, after the trauma of being fired from Columbia Records, and you have to start from scratch, I had to put the R in A&R. A stands for artist, which were all the artists that I had discovered that have gotten me in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But R stands for repertoire, and I knew that for me to compete then, because I didn't want to start from scratch. I mean, this was an unforeseen, unfortunate thing that resilience and perseverance gets you over. But I couldn't do it just from discovery of rock artists, because whatever the greatness of Patti Smith or Lou Reed or Graham Parker, they don't give you that kind of commercial clout. So I had to look to the songs that would go into the mainstream. And so there you are like an artist, in a sense that I picked every song that Whitney ever recorded. And with that kind of background, and she and I were creative collaborators. I mean, I would narrow hundreds down with my A&R staff, maybe to 20. And then she and I would meet and narrow it down to the final 10. But you heard what Barry said. So there it really is, moving into the creative area. I never would have, all these series of lucky breaks, if my first law firm did not lose their largest client, be through a merger, where I said, well, coming from the competitive climate, let me tell you, because I've only done a few of these, where this film is just getting out there for its premiere later this month in LA and New York. But the history of lucky breaks and really accidents occurring. When I graduated from Harvard, the going rate, was the wonderful sum of $4,500 a year. My paycheck was $86.53. I'll never forget that. And I went to a small law firm. I didn't want the competition, of a large firm. But that firm lost its biggest client. I saw the vulnerability there. So I knew Bob Rosenman at Harvard, and his father, Samuel Rosenman, the great lawyer, the great speechwriter for Roosevelt and Harry Truman. So knowing that, I applied to the Rosenman law firm. And I was accepted, and I was one of their non-litigation few attorneys. Maybe there were 5 of us. And I was fortunately assigned to do the contracts for Columbia Artists Management, Inc., which because of antitrust separation from CBS, they were existing on their own. All those series of lucky breaks, for me, when the lawyer for Columbia Records came to the firm and said, who's doing Cammy's contracts? And they pointed to me. I was ready, at that time to deal with that offer. But nothing comes easy, nothing comes overnight. And I was very fortunate through those lucky breaks to be put in the position. Then you got to know, when to move and when not to move. And I was fortunate to move.
Well, so you're being very modest, and you're saying you had a lot of lucky breaks, and so another way to think of it is that you were willing to take risks and make some changes along the way and try some things that you hadn't expected to try. So when you left law school, did you have that mindset, that risk-taking mindset?
Oh, no. No, I mean, I had no money. When my parents died, I had $4,000 to my name. And so at law school, after the first year, I was in that position where there were 2 or 3 of us who could be on law review or on the board of student advisors. And I chose the board of student advisors because it paid $500. And I needed the money, simply put. And so no, I totally, not knowing what a lawyer would be, I mean, you know, with the Socrates method of answering questions with questions, you don't exactly have confidence. No, I ended up with that law firm, but I realized that, excuse me, that they were totally discouraging to bring in any business of your own. I didn't know anybody with money, so here they represented CBS and Bill Paley and others. So I realized I would be a service partner. I was making, at that point, $11,000 a year. And I was being very discouraged, by the way, by Sam Rosenman's partner, Ralph Colin, who's a great lawyer, great name, and was his client. CBS was his client, who said, I don't think you should take this job. He saw me every day in my khaki pants and my tweed jacket, and he said, you came from Harvard, and it's a whole different atmosphere than the record business. They're wearing gold chains and open shirts, and it's very jivey, and I had to consider that, but I also knew that I came from Brooklyn. And I also knew that I came from a melting pot of experiences. And Harvard was an evolution of a certain category. But the best advice I ever got in my life was from my mother. And that was to say, you know, don't just be committed to books. Be equally committed to people. Be equally committed to life itself. And so therefore, you do see people that are totally cerebral and don't develop people skills and don't develop.
I have met some of them, yes.
Okay. So in any event, I felt that that the record industry might have been given a wrong overview from him. And I did, I'm happy to say, not take that advice. And a whole new world has opened up to me.
Were you frightened? So a couple of people said in the movie that you're a worrier, that you worry about things. When you made the move, did it feel scary to you?
Yeah, did it appear scary? Was I concerned? Well, I knew I was moving into another area. I never expected to get into music. I got a great offer out of nowhere to become assistant counsel, literally for 6 months to at most a year, where I would become counsel for Columbia Records. And so by this time I was married, and I had had one child, and you know, I was making $11,000. I was going to make $25,000, just putting this in practical terms that everybody thinks of. But what I learned through the New York public school system, whether it was PS 161, whether it was Erasmus Hall High School, and through education at NYU and certainly Harvard, probably most of all, the work ethic and the amount of work and what is required. So I went back to school. I mean, I took courses in, I was living in New York, no disrespect to NYU Law School, and I took courses in unfair competition, to Columbia was being sued as a monopoly for its record club. I had no background, really, to speak in antitrust, and I took courses in copyright, and the answer is you got to prepare yourself for whatever it is. And when I became the lawyer, I didn't want to be an ivory tower lawyer. I wanted to understand the business so that I listened to records. I read everything I could, not to prepare to move out of it, but so that I could be a lawyer who understood the complexity of the business and not give somewhat removed ivory tower advice.
So there was a scene in which one of your colleagues described the Friday afternoons where you would sit and you would listen to 6 different versions and you would go over again and again and make, so that behavior, that attention to detail, that sort of laser focus, in those moments where they were describing you, it sounded to me a lot like a description of a lawyer and what lawyers do. Did you feel that training come into play when you were making creative decisions?
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, the fear when I was at Harvard, that first year, which was the most trying year of my life, when you don't get any exams except a practice exam midway through. And I had to maintain a B+ average to maintain my scholarship. And everybody else had a Phi Beta Kappa key. And Warren Seavey, the great professor of tort, you answer a question with a question, and so you never feel you really know anything. I mean, until you take it, there's no way until you take. So I've always had a healthy respect for failure. I've always approached everything that you just have to work to the last minute to achieve it, never to be that confident. Right now, over whatever recent years, they don't play your records because you discovered Joplin and Springsteen. They play your records because you were in the game at that time. And so the combination of respect for failure, the combination of the need to get certain grades, no question about it, because I would have lost my scholarship and I had no money to continue from any source. So it does have a lifetime impact for sure.
Now you just mentioned Warren Seavey. Now I have it on good authority that Professor Seavey was your favorite professor. So does this mean you liked the Socratic method?
I didn't like the Socratic.
You did not like it.
I didn't like it. I think that it stimulates a thinking process, which is probably a very valuable one and necessary one. But all my study habits were really to be in firm command of what it takes to achieve an A. I really always got an A, frankly, in every school that I went to. And not knowing, the Socratic method, having a question, it stimulated the thinking and talk more, and it was very valuable in maybe the process of becoming a lawyer. But for someone who was filled with anxiety and fear all the way through, it did not give self-confidence a strong assist, so to speak.
So may I ask you another question about law school while we're on it?
Yeah.
So I have it on good authority that you took a copyright course that required you to read Variety. So did that plant the seed of your later career?
There's no question that I was attracted to the entertainment field, not necessarily to music. Variety, was more the coverage of film and to a limited extent television, very limited extent music. But yes, when I took courses in copyright, I always read Variety and, always followed the grosses of films or with the expectation as to what they would do at the box office. It started with my love of baseball that continues, my big fan still of the New York Yankees, but the idea of, it's dangerous to say that in Boston, I realize. But
You're the guest of honor. I think it's okay.
No, the statistics, playing with numbers has always been very much a part of my own. So I still, watch every film and how they do as compared to expectations, sort of avocation.
So you, of course, you're called the man with the golden ears, and you've nurtured a lot of musical talent. You've also been an executive, and you've nurtured and worked with other executives. Is it the same kind of process in identifying and nurturing great artists and great executives in your career?
I think the similarity or the analogy is that you're looking for a quality that makes the other person special, so that obviously in praising music talent, you're praising the material if they're a writer. If they're not a writer, you're saying, are they just going to be good or are they going to be headliners? So the big boost, to be gratifying aspect, is the fact that all these artists, so many of them, 40, 45, 50 years later, are still headliners. I mean, that is what you're really looking for, not the hit, just the hit. But you're looking for that quality to lift the audience out of their respective seats. And so that Santana is still headlining, and Manilow is still headlining, and Aretha is still headlining, and you can go down the line. It's it's really very gratifying. On the subject of when you interview as an executive, first to me, no matter what job was being discussed, was that they love music, and that if they had to work 12 hours a day, that it would not be that chore that they're looking at the watch, but that they would feel that they were enjoying it, and the time would not be a factor. So certainly love of music has always been. And the fact that so many of these people that you might have seen on the screen went on to become president of another company. Donnie Ienner, who was my head of promotion and executive vice president, became head of Columbia Records. Roy Lott became head of Capitol Records. There might have been a dozen of these executives who have gone on to become head of their labels. So that's another affirmation that the teams that I helped put together were unique and special.
So this is a really extraordinary story. You watch it, and it's one thing after another that just it's a completely stunning career, as you know. And we have a number of people in the audience who are starting their careers, and I wonder if, in closing, you'd have some advice for them about how to think about what they should be doing in structuring their lives.
Well, there are two things I would make a point of. Certainly, one of the paramount aspects, I think, of the film is that although my fortune was good both in choice of artists, choice of material, if the artist did not write, I would never give material to artists that was self-contained. There were hurdles and trauma to overcome. And so I think that the film was profound, graphic, frank, and accurate in describing the circumstances of my being fired at Columbia. And it was in all the good things that happened, all the lucky breaks that happened, there was the misfortune of unwittingly getting involved as the focal point of a witch hunt. I had no involvement in it whatsoever. And the politics of them spending millions of dollars to come up short on the payola and drug question. And when it came to me, they said, and I only in this setting, I would say, of what happened, they were going to drop everything regarding me except one vacation. When I went to Jamaica at the time of Bob Marley, and I was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award and visiting 2 or 3 recording studios, because I brought my wife with me at that time because it was a holiday, they said, if you would agree to admit that half that business charge was personal, and it came to the sum of $2,500 in tax money, we will drop, we were on the eve of trial of this whole thing, and they dropped everything else. And to clarify what happened on the legal front, because perhaps this is not as clear, there would have been no consequence. It was $2,500 of taxes in a year that I paid taxes on almost $500,000 dollars, and it was a misdemeanor, which would have had no impact whatsoever on the law license, which was discussed. And so my lawyers, I mean, I was of a mind to fight further because I knew that this trip was a total business trip. But it was $2,500. I said yes. Subsequently, a law was passed that if a lawyer had any tax offense whatsoever of any amount of money, their law license would be suspended, never revoked, and they would have to take the bar again. So when that was passed, and even though I was running the record company I was running, it was something that existed out there that technically, post facto, never, if it was a diversion, I never would have done it. But post facto, I did not want to leave that blight or that ambiguity on my record. And so, of course, I took the bar exam, and of course, with all that I learned at Harvard, I passed. So that, I've had to, in the last few years, because of what happened after the digital revolution, where the public got used to getting music free, the health of our industry was very much at stake. And you found the same arguments: will rock survive? Will contemporary music survive? How will they get people to pay for it now that they're getting it for nothing? And because of the scholarships I got, both at NYU and at Harvard, to give back, I've endowed the school at Tisch at NYU, because in growing up, I was always envious of those going to film school at USC or at NYU, where if you want to be a writer, director, producer, you can go to school or film school, whereas music was always treated as an elite situation. You could study at Berkeley Jazz, or you can do some study of classical music, but here, my life was changed. The epiphany that I received at Monterey, the incredible role that contemporary music has played around the world, moving over all those cultural divides and from European and Asian, African countries, that contemporary music has been a worldwide important force. So I've established at Tisch what they now call the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, and they get a degree and they can study every aspect of music in the same way that you can film. But the big question is that I thought to get, and it's the most applied to division within Tisch as far as that is concerned. There is grown enormously since we first began it. And the question is, am I studying for a career that will have a future? Is there a future? And the good news is that although there are problems in music, maybe an over-domination of hip-hop and dance. Where is the next Aretha? Where is the next Whitney? Where is the next Dylan going to come from? But streaming is so incredibly impactful, and it just opened up music to show that no technological revolution is going to obsolete. Music is a part of all of our lives, and so the record industry is healthy, again, because of streaming. And the latest report I really just read 2 weeks ago is that, whether it was Goldman Sachs or I forget the source, was saying that because of the universality of streaming and the billions of views and the love of music, that they expect that the music industry in 2030 will be a $41 billion industry. So yes, I think apart from the individual reward that I have been blessed to luckily find myself in and discover so much about myself, I love the music, or I wouldn't be doing it today. I have 3 albums coming out apart from this film over the next 6 months, and I love it, or I wouldn't do it. And I think it's a great career, and it will be positive for the future. Yes.
So I'm hearing I always like to number and label things, and I'm hearing 5 things in here. So 1, I'm hearing resiliency. 2, risk-taking. 3, adaptability. 4, attention to detail. And 5, perhaps most importantly, do something you really love. Did I capture it?
Brilliantly.
All right, well, then I'm going to quit while I'm ahead and say thank you very much for being here. Really magnificent. Thank you.
Thank you so much.